I now wish to call the meeting to order. Apologies have been received from Deputy Éamon Ó Cuív and Deputy Niamh Smyth. At the outset, I remind members, staff, witnesses and those in the public gallery to turn off their mobile phones. Mobile phones interfere with the sound system and make it difficult for the parliamentary reporters to report the meeting, and also television, radio, web streaming. So I just ask everyone to take the time just to have a look at their mobile phones, turn them off. I now wish to read some formal notices for the information of our witnesses. I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the Chairman to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against any person outside the House or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. It is proposed that any opening statements or submissions or other documents supplied by witnesses or other bodies to the committee relating to the topic of this meeting be published on the committee's website. Is that agreed? Agreed. We have two public sessions today. The first is in relation to flooding at Ballycar on the Galway-Limerick railway line, followed by opportunities for investment in heavy rail. This is our third of our series of meetings on these particular topics. We will start with flooding at Ballycar, which is on the Galway to Limerick railway line, which is regularly underwater. The flooding at Ballycar is frequent, persistent, and due to climate change will only get worse. Ballycar is an example of groundwater flooding which occurs in counties, in other similar counties like in Roscommon, in Galway, in Mayo and in Clare, which is slow to flood and very slow to drain. At a simple level, when the water inflow to Ballycar is greater than the outflow after persistent heavy rain, the Turlough fills up. The water outflow could be augmented by a pipe running from the Turlough and basically bypassing the bottleneck of the sinkhole that's there and drain it into Lough Gash and the Shannon Estuary. However, whatever we do, we need to ensure that we do not increase other flood, environmental and infrastructure risks. Mitigating the Ballycar flood risk requires a collaborative multi-agency approach, and we must avoid a silo mentality. While the Office of Public Works is the national lead agency for alluvial and coastal flood risk mitigation, the Geological Survey takes the lead for investigating groundwater flooding. Clare County Council is responsible for flood risk mitigation in County Clare. Irish Rail is the rail operator and is also responsible for railway infrastructure. The National Parks and Wildlife Service is concerned about SACs, and the Irish Aviation Authority has infrastructure which could be at risk from flooding. Addressing this flooding is important. If confidence is in the railways to be maintained, passengers need to know that the service is reliable. This committee sees the Galway-Limerick Railway as phase 1 of the Western Railway corridor, which we hope to see extended to Tuam and Claremorris and eventually on to Sligo. The committee is delighted to meet representatives from the various bodies here today for our third meeting on this subject. And I have to say I'd like to thank the members of this committee for supporting me on bringing forward this particular subject. This is our third engagement, and prior to the intervention of this committee, the agencies weren't really basically talking to one another, and there was a bit of passing of the parcel, for the want of a better term. But today's opening statement, which will be given to us by Colin, it just really highlights the collaborative effort that has been put in by the various different agencies. And I'm really encouraged that the deadlines that were put forward last November have been lived up to. that serious work has been undertaken in a joint effort by all the various different agencies. So I'd now like to call on Colin Heatherly to give the opening statement on behalf of the various different agencies. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you. Chairman, members of the committee, it was agreed by the 4 agencies concerned, Éamon, Clare County Council, the Office of Public Works and the National Parks and Wildlife Services, the Department of Cultural Heritage and the Gaeltacht, to deliver a joint opening statement to the committee. Collectively, we welcome the opportunity to update the committee on developments since November 2018, when we previously attended. As noted in November, Éamon have engaged RPS consulting engineers to develop a feasible engineering solution to the flooding issue at Ballycar, with an updated report due in spring 2019. A draft report has been prepared by RPS and was issued to Éamon, Clare County Council and the OPW in early April. The report identified a preferred option for the alleviation of flooding on the Limerick to Galway rail line at Ballycar, consisting of the attenuation of some flows upstream of the railway line in Finn and Rossrow locks, the removal of the underground restriction between the Swallowhole and Spring downstream of Ballycar Lock, the construction of diversion pipeline and channel to divert excess flows around Newmarket on Fergus and Loch Gash, the upgrading of existing stream channels and culverts, and construction of a flood protection embankment along the Irish Aviation Authority's infrastructure in Earl Moor. Following an initial review of the report, it was agreed that the option of diverting some flows to the Owengarney or Ratty River should be further investigated, and the recommendations in the report updated as necessary. This requires the completion of additional topographical surveys and hydraulic modelling, which is currently being undertaken by RPS. Following the finalisation of this report, the most appropriate, technically and environmentally feasible option to address the Ballycar flooding issue will be considered by the bodies, and the appropriate route for the progression of the works, including funding, will be investigated. This represents the joint position of the 4 bodies. We're committed to the concept of sustainability and to the delivery of optimum service of key strategic infrastructure, and will continue to work together to resolve the problem on the rail line of Ballycar. We welcome any questions the committee may have.
Thanks very much. I now ask Ted McCormack for an opening statement.
Okay. Thank you. Chairman, members of the committee, as outlined to the committee in November, Geological Survey Ireland is a division of the Department of Communications, Climate Action and the Environment, and is Ireland's national geoscience organisation. The GSI carries out its role as a key knowledge centre and data repository with a library, archives and extensive digital data holdings. It provides an extensive advisory service, particularly to local authorities, and has statutory roles as a national archive and consultee in relation to planning in areas such as county development plans, wind farm development and foreshore licences. In addition to supporting government and local authorities, GSI provides data and advice to industry and research and acts as a project partner to all aspects of Irish geoscience, especially in European projects. GSI has developed expertise in the area of groundwater flooding, particularly in understanding complex karst systems, including turlocks, as they can be important pathways for pollution. In 2016, the Programme for Partnership of Government under the area of climate change and flooding contained the following objective in relation to turlock systems. We will provide resources to the OPW to commission studies into individual problematic, prone to flooding turlock systems, if requested by a local authority or another relevant state agency. GSI has been tasked with gathering historic and new information to deliver on this objective and initiated a new dedicated groundwater flooding project in collaboration with researchers at Trinity College Dublin and the Institute of Technology Carlow. The core objectives of the project are to establish a permanent monitoring network to provide long-term quantitative flood data, as well as producing national historic and predictive groundwater flood maps. Since the last joint Oireachtas committee meeting, the GSI groundwater flooding programme has been focused on producing a national groundwater flood map while also installing and maintaining monitoring equipment at groundwater flood sites. A national maximum historic groundwater flood map has been produced and supplied to the OPW in April this year. Work on a predictive flood map is ongoing and the map shall be supplied to the OPW later this summer. The predictive map will present not just the likely extent of groundwater flooding, but also the probability of a given flood occurring at applicable sites. These maps will assist the OPW in fulfilling their obligations as required under the second implementation cycle of the EU Floods Directive. In addition, the Geological Survey Ireland has also recently had discussions with Met Éireann regarding potential groundwater flood forecasting capabilities. In regards to Ballycar, the Geological Survey has been taking part in the technical subcommittee meetings regarding the flooding in the area. Monitoring stations have been installed at Ballycar and Lochnass Turlocks. These stations record water level data at hourly intervals, which is freely available upon request. In addition to these monitoring stations, Ballycar and other flood-prone Turlocks along the Western Railway corridor are being monitored using Copernicus satellite imagery. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I want to recognise the presence of Mr. John Fitzgerald from the National Parks and Wildlife Service, Ms. Carmen Kirby, Director of Physical Development, Clare County Council, Mr. John Lee, Senior Engineer, Roads and Transportation Department, Clare County Council, Mr. John Sneedham, Commissioner, and Mr. Cian O'Donnell, both from the OPW, Mr. Colin Heatherly and Mr. Barry Kenny from Éamon Ó Cuív, and Dr. Ted McCormack was giving us that opening statement. I just really very much encouraged by the opening statement that has been delivered. I suppose the key question is when this preferred option is put together, the key question is in relation to funding, how it will be funded. Has there been any particular discussion among the different groups that are working together in relation to that question of funding? And possibly, could you give some outline in relation to that? Basically, what are the next steps that need to be done? And will there be any public consultation in relation to the preferred option that will emerge? And is there any time frame as regards to when construction works will happen on this particular scheme? Possibly I call on Barry Kenny there of Éamon Ó Cuív to answer those very easy questions.
I might just defer to my colleagues if that's okay with you, Chairman, in terms of just the detail of those engagements that have been taking place.
Maybe Colin, would you want to take it? Carmen?
I'll come in on this one. I suppose I'd start by saying we've had excellent collaboration between all the organisations, which has been very useful in arriving at a preferred solution. There's some survey work to be completed. It's ongoing at the moment. That'll take another, I suspect, four or 5 weeks, and after that the report needs to be completed. So I maybe prefer not to indicate what it's likely that this project will cost going forward until we finalise the report.
Sure.
The next steps, I suppose, after that would be finalise the report. We'd then need to do a cost. Obviously, the report will be able to indicate a cost for the project. We'd need to then do a cost-benefit, or Éamon Ó Cuív will do a cost-benefit analysis, at which stage we then need to find a funding mechanism for the project. After that, Éamon Ó Cuív would need to commission consultants to do a detailed design, environmental, EIAR, and all of that. And I suppose from a public, that's when I suppose any public consultation will come into play, when we get into knowing what it is that the solution is, which we're nearly at that. And then when we get into the environmental and the planning and all of that, there will obviously be public consultation at that stage.
Sure. And just in terms of funding, without naming a figure, do you believe that all agencies will put in some sort of an element of funding? Have you spoken about that as a collective, how this will be funded? Is there any ideas in relation to that? Will there be a joint, maybe, application to the Department of Transport, or is something like that envisaged, or has there been any conversation in relation to that question?
Yeah, I think if a joint application, I think, is probably the route to go. The scale of the money is quite significant for the works that it involves, so it would have to be a major infrastructure project, yeah.
And could you see an element being covered by, say, Éamon Ó Cuív, maybe the OPW, the Department of Transport, or is it just one application, or have you maybe had those discussions at all?
It's possibly a bit premature. Obviously, we understand there's going to be significant costs, but it's possibly premature to have those discussions till we have it nailed down what the outline design is and some kind of costing agreed before we can progress on it. So it does need to happen, and it's it is something that certainly Éamon wouldn't. The scale of funding for that line is something that we would have to look at, because it isn't. We would need to make an application for those kind of funds for that line, because it doesn't warrant. It doesn't warrant that kind of expenditure on how it is. So that would be the way going forward, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much. Do members have questions? Senator Coffey.
Yeah, if I could, Chairman, first of all, to welcome all the witnesses to the meeting. I think, look, it's just an update meeting as far as I can see. November of 2018, we've had an in-depth discussion about the problems on this particular site at Ballycar and the impact it's having on transport, which is a national infrastructure in my mind. But what I do welcome, Chairman, and I suppose it's down to yourself driving it, that this committee as well, working along with you, is that we have ensured that there is at least now collaboration between all of the stakeholders involved, and I think that is welcome, something that we didn't have, well, in my mind anyway, stand corrected, but we didn't have prior to last year, and that the report is almost complete, and I do note that survey work still has to be completed within the next month or so, and then at least we will have a hard copy report with recommendations for the best solutions. But of course then we come to the biggest problem, and that's the matter of funding. So, look, all I'd say is, it's not questions, I look forward to seeing the report. I would ask that when the report is published, that we would get an opportunity in this committee to discuss it and maybe see how we can assist in bringing forward the solution that's best recommended. Because, look, we know it's not going to be easy. It is a piece of national rail infrastructure. I think it does behove the government and state agencies to do what they can to ensure that the problem is addressed. And I think our committee should be working towards that. So just to thank people for their update, but I think the hard work really lies ahead now that the report is almost complete.
Thanks, Senator. Okay. Yeah, I suppose I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today, and for putting together this report, for working over the last number of months, and we look forward to you reporting back again to the committee. And as Senator Coffey has said, like, we're here to assist, and we as a committee will certainly come right behind that report and assist in trying to draw down funding to implement it, because it's badly needed. It's an issue that has been overlooked for too long, and we will assist with you when you're completed that report and a preferred option comes about. So thanks very much for your presence here today. Ms. Kirby.
Yeah, just to welcome that very much. I think we're all obviously of the opinion that this is a really important piece of infrastructure. It's really important to meet the economic and social needs of the people that are using the rail line. Going forward, it's very important that we have a reliable service on the rail line. So I'd welcome the support of the committee here to help us to progress it.
Thanks very much. It's proposed that the meeting be suspended for a few moments to allow witnesses to leave. Is that agreed? Agreed. This is our third session with Irish Rail. We have also met with the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport and the National Transport Authority and other stakeholders. Failure to invest in public transport results in poor interchange facilities, congestion. Basically, you're burning a lot of carbon. A relatively modest investment is clearly in the public interest. We must be careful to avoid analysis paralysis always waiting for the next consultant's report, while investment is held back by a kind of glass ceiling. The committee would be delighted to hear firm investment proposals from Irish Rail. And I now call on Mr Barry Kenny, Corporate Communications Manager from Irish Rail, to make his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman. At the outset, I'd like to pass on the apologies of our Chief Executive, Jim Mead, who is unavailable to attend today. Mr Mead has previously outlined to the committee on our previous discussions the scale of our operations and our investment proposals. I want to just briefly recap that, updated for the full year of 2018, and advise the committee of the developments since our November 2018 attendance and how they'll benefit the national heavy rail services that we provide. Our team of over 3,800 people maintain a network of 2,200 kilometres. We operate 4,900 train services every week, carry over 923,000 customers each week, and we operate 144 stations in 23 counties across the country. We also transported 90 million tonne kilometres of freight by rail in 2018, and as Port Authority for Rosslare, Europort brought 130,000 freight units through the port and over 800,000 passengers and 21,000 trade cars. Once again, last year a record number of customers travelled on our services, 47.9 million. Passenger journeys were made, which is up from the previous high of 45.5 million. That figure was achieved in both 2007 and in the previous year, 2017. The growth is obviously most welcome. It's set to continue. It's continuing this year, but it also places acute pressure on our existing resources across both urban and interurban services. That's why our investment plans are so crucial, both to cater for the existing demand that we have and allow us to expand the role we play in meeting transport needs. As the Chief Executive has said to you previously, we're ambitious for our rail service, for how it can deliver solutions to congestion and environmental sustainability for Ireland. So before I address the progress in the investment programme specifically, I want to advise the committee of a very significant development in the ongoing steady state funding for the organisation. We've mentioned before that during the economic crisis the company was significantly underfunded for many years. The NDP committed that funding shortfall would be resolved by 2021. But we're pleased to say that this year, 2019, has seen the shortfall resolved through the Department of Transport, and that means that we are now adequately funded to maintain the network and services that we're contracted to provide. And that makes sure that we've got a solid foundation to play the fullest role possible in the future and exploit the investment that is planned. So as the underinvestment developments, rather than reiterate the previous statements, I'll just focus on what has changed since we last met. However, I'm obviously happy to answer any questions on all aspects of the investment programme. New trains. As mentioned, we're experiencing record demand and we need new trains along with enhanced infrastructure capacity. On Monday of this week, the process to order the largest and greenest fleet in Irish public transport history began, as we in Éamon, supported by the National Transport Authority, sought expressions of interest from global train manufacturers for up to 600 electric or battery electric powered carriages over a 10-year timescale. DART expansion is the €2 billion investment under Project Ireland 2040 over the next 10 years, which will see the capacity of the rail network transformed through investments in up to 300 new carriages, electrification of lines within the commuter belt and key infrastructure works to allow more trains to operate across the entire national network. However, the ambitious tender, which was commenced on Monday, provides for up to 600 carriages, which allows for both that planned fleet expansion, replacement of the original DART fleet, which by the end of the current NDP in 2027 will be almost 45 years old. I think that illustrates the benefit of any train carriage asset that we order, and also ensure that there's a framework in place for more carriages to be ordered if future growth and demand occurs. So the tender notice is out, it's in the official journal of the European Union and e-tenders, and we expect virtually every major global train manufacturer to be attracted by this, such as its scale. It'll make sure that customers on the network benefit from up-to-date facilities and technology, and there are scale benefits in the competitive tendering for the NTA-funded investment. While electricity-powered trains are expected to make up the overwhelming majority of the train orders, the tender also provides for a possible first tranche of battery electric hybrid trains. That's so as to ensure that should the funding or the planning processes see the electrification of the first of the lines planned defer to beyond 2024, new trains will still be available from that date to meet surging demand. However, the overall order will see the entire Greater Dublin area rail fleet and up to 80% of all heavy rail journeys in Ireland set for a potentially emissions-free future with electric power, as well as generating reductions in noise and cost savings in our ongoing train operations. The full national network will benefit from this investment. Existing intercity and commuter trains which are currently utilised to meet GDA demand become available to boost frequency and capacity nationwide. And we're also planning to convert the intercity railcar fleet, the existing one which is 234 carriage strong, to diesel electric hybrid, which will reduce emissions on national routes. As well as the major order that I've mentioned, we're also with the NTA progressing shorter-term options to meet the record demand that we're experiencing. With that 47.9 million journeys in 2018 and capacity requirements becoming acute both on national and urban routes at peak times, this includes negotiations being underway between Éamon Ó and our supplier, seeking to agree an order for at least 41 extra intercity railcar carriages, adding to that existing fleet of 234. Those trains would enter service from late 2021. This will allow us to increase capacity on key peak intercity and commuter services ahead of the service expansion facilitated by the major order I've outlined above. A tender process is also underway by the NTA for the possible purchase or lease of pre-owned trains, which would also involve modifications to fleet, particularly because Ireland's track gauge differs from that of other railways. In Cork, the NTA has published this month the Cork Metropolitan Area Draft Transport Strategy, which sets out an exciting vision for sustainable transport in the Cork area. Included is a strategy for the future of Cork commuter rail, which includes 8 new stations on the Mallow Cove and Middleton lines, double tracking of the Middleton line, DART-style frequency on all 3 Cork commuter lines, future electrification and through running at Kent Station and improved integration with other modes. This strategy will now be the subject of public consultation undertaken by the NTA, with which we will engage. It envisages a Cork commuter network with a capacity for 16 million journeys annually. That's a genuinely transformative scale of modal shift. Mentioned obviously the Ballycar, which is on the Western Rail Corridor, and as the committee will know, both the current programme for government and the National Development Plan committed to a financial and economic appraisal of proposals to extend the Western Rail Corridor. Working to terms of reference specified by the Department of Transport, we have appointed consultants EYDKM to undertake independent appraisal and public and stakeholder consultation. The purpose of this appraisal is to establish if the proposed extension from Athenry to Tuam, which is Phase 2, and from Tuam to Claremorris, which is Phase 3, represents value for money. We expect to commence the public consultation process next week, and we will be inviting members of the public and interested organisations to participate. We will be seeking their information and views on current transport usage, current transport services and views on the extension of the Western Rail Corridor to Phases 2 and 3 and any other comments or observations. EYDKM are due to complete the appraisal and present the report, including findings and recommendations, to ourselves and the Department of Transport by the end of September. The Department will then undertake an independent peer review of the report and its findings and recommendations to advise and inform the policy decisions which will be arising. In Waterford, Éamon Ó has continued to liaise with the Waterford City and County Council on the plans for the Waterford North Quays, which incorporate a relocated Plunkett station as part of an integrated transport hub, as well as progressing our own signalling and station layout design to accommodate increased service frequency and facilitate freight operations. We're facilitating all necessary site investigation and studies for the wider North Quays project. Beyond this, the infrastructure studies necessary for detailed design to enhance capacity in the central Dublin area and thus overall national capacity are progressing, and plans for station facilities, including but not limited to additional car parking, accessibility and customer information, are also being reviewed in cooperation with the NTA. It's clear that as a country and a society, the sustainability of our economy into the future and the impacts on our environment are becoming a greater concern for our citizens and our customers. As the most sustainable public transport mode, we see an investment programme that will not only affect modal shift from private to public transport, but minimise further the impact on the environment of each journey made with us. With an accelerated electrification programme, this will also have cost benefits to our operations, thus yielding a return to our economy and society by all measures. I welcome the committee's continuing support for these goals and happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thanks very much, Mr. Canney. Senator Maura Hopkins, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. Just a number of points. Obviously, it's very clear that Irish Rail are doing a huge amount in terms of investment in infrastructure, with a particular emphasis on environmental sustainability. So obviously that's hugely positive, and there appears to be significant investment which we were starved of for many years, as you've pointed out. I suppose I just want to particularly ask, and I know you've mentioned it in respect of the Western Rail corridor, with regard to appraisal representing query value for money. I'd just like to maybe get further comments with respect to the services for the West, both freight and commuter. I am particularly familiar with the Westport line, and I certainly believe there is definite underutilisation of that line, and also I suppose we have to take into account the Galway line and the Sligo line as well. But what are the plans in terms of, firstly, increasing the number of customers on that line, and also in respect of your significant focus on environmental sustainability with regard to freight? So just a kind of commentary on those two issues would be helpful.
Thanks very much, Senator. Mr. Canney?
Yeah, I'll take those individually. So, in terms of the Western Rail corridor, as I say, we are working to terms of reference that have been established by the Department of Transport. So very much, and I think people do probably worry when they hear the phrase value for money, is it a narrow financial? It's not a narrow financial assessment at all. Infrastructure requires public support. It requires something that doesn't just mention the bottom line of an individual organisation. It looks at the economic return. It looks at the benefits to society, the benefits and connectivity that it provides. So they are the terms of reference to which EYDKM will be working to look at those full, both financial and wider economic benefits that the extension would yield. There will be, in terms of the public consultation, that will allow people to freely express their opinions. We do know there's a lot of opinions on the topic, and that opportunity will be there. We will advertise that extensively and ensure that people in the region and indeed beyond are fully aware that that consultation is taking place. But ultimately then, post the Department of Transport's independent peer review, it will become a policy decision, because there is obviously going to be public funding required if the line were to be reinstated based on the outputs of that. And that will be a decision, as I say, at department or indeed at political level ultimately. But it will be a comprehensive study and as a very much an independent one. The terms of reference are set out and EYDKM, as I say, will work to that and report to ourselves and the department. In terms of the wider services for the West, thankfully that passenger growth that I'm mentioning has continued in terms of the West of Ireland as well. Looking at last year as an example, the Dublin to Westport line grew further, relatively modest I suppose, from about 570 to 582,000 in the year. The Dublin to Galway line, similar, up to 1.4 million journeys through the year, and the Dublin-Sligo line also growing to 920,000. Sorry, my apologies, sorry, 111,000. You'll excuse me, sorry, with the various suite of figures, 1.4 million journeys for Dublin-Sligo, growing, as I say, 577,000 for Westport Ballina, and I completely got the Galway figure wrong, just over 2 million journeys during 2018. That growth that we are seeing, obviously, is one that is now spreading nationally, because I think in the early days when passenger growth was coming back to us, it was driven at an urban level primarily, but now it is growing nationally. Overall, on intercity journeys, it outstripped Dart and commuter growth last year, 8.5%. There is probably more capacity within the existing services on the intercity right now, versus how it would be an direct commuter, but we are nonetheless coming up against the same constraints that we have. So that 41 carriage order, which I mentioned, which is the shorter term measure, is going to benefit both intercity and commuter routes. And we will be looking at specifically heavily loaded services in the peaks to provide additional capacity in the first instance on individual services. When we then get into the bigger order, and when those trains start to come through and increase our overall pool of trains, and with the works on infrastructure in areas closer to the city where capacity of the infrastructure is more of at a premium, that then will allow us to operate more trains at that time. So the first wave is about longer trains, and the second wave is about more trains. And you're talking about, as I say, late 21 to 22 for those longer trains, and then you're into 24 and onwards for the expansion in services. So that's, I suppose, in short, how we are working with it. In terms of we have increased, I suppose, in the past services. It's not that long ago. For example, Dublin Sligo with 3 trains each way a day. Now it's 8. Westport has gone from 3 to 5. We'd like to see it grow further. We are updating our overall strategy to, in terms of intercity service, to ensure that there's a clarity and a direction to service frequency improvement, because we genuinely feel, look at what happened with Dublin Cork when we went to an hourly service all day, a genuine step change in the number of people that travel with us. If you have something like the Westport line, for example, which connects off the, you've got a connection to Dublin Galway with a mix of direct and changing services. There's no reason Dublin Galway and Dublin Westport can't be hourly services, which are transformative in the frequency that we can offer. And frequency isn't just about, well, you know what I mean, there are more trains. It gives customers more flexibility. It makes the overall service more attractive. And similarly, looking against while Sligo has more of its existing infrastructure capacity utilised, again, how we can grow that further. And I would say that's something that we see right around the network as the investment funding comes into play. In terms of our freight services, we have recently increased the volume of the Ballina to Dublin Port freight services, which are operating. We continue to work with the likes of the Irish Exporters Association, with freight forwarders to identify opportunities. A lot of them tend to be linked with significant investment programmes to see, I suppose, traffics that will be best suited to rail freight, tying in with planning processes as well. We do have a number of options on that. We are probably in non-disclosure territory as we discuss with potential customers, but we will be confident that that scale of rail freight operation can continue to grow in the coming years. But certainly just in the last couple of months, that Ballina to Dublin operation has actually increased. So I hope that addresses the points that you've made.
Sorry, I just want to say thank you for that, and I suppose I'm mindful of the fact that things have improved. I'll just leave it maybe on one point. The last train that leaves Houston station is at 6:15 going to Westport, and I suppose when we compare that to Cork, I think it leaves at 9 o'clock.
Right. Yeah.
So, we would like to see, and you've acknowledged the fact that I suppose the number of customers using that service has increased, and we think there's a lot more potential. So I suppose I'd like to emphasise the strong fact that I suppose a lot of people have raised this issue with me, because a lot of people are commuting, and as you rightly say, people need flexibility in terms of using the service. So if you can be mindful of that, I think that would be important in terms of increasing the flexibility of times, particularly serving the West. I think.
And just suppose briefly on that point, we have, after a prolonged recruitment embargo, been having new intakes of drivers. We have driver training classes taking place at the moment, and as that driver pool grows, that's one, obviously, capacity limitation that we have. It is an obvious next step. I think not only on the Westport route, there are a number of routes where the last service, there's certainly an appetite. You do have to establish it. There's a firm business case underneath that, but there is an appetite for later services, and we will certainly look at that openly and with the NTA.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much.
Senator Paudie Coffey.
Yeah, Gormagut, Cahirirloch, and I welcome this opportunity for the committee to engage with the executives of Irish Rail here today, and first of all to acknowledge the progress that's being made with Irish Rail. I know that they've been through a number of difficult years, but now business is increasing, getting busier again, and I needn't tell you, but obviously with the increasing population and increasing demands on tourism, you have to be fit for purpose as a national transport provider, and I know you're planning for that. And on top of all of that as well, we have, as we note, a greater appetite for sustainable travel, and as we all know, train travel is one of the most comfortable and sustainable versions of travel that we can get, and something that I believe we need to support. So I'd say that. First of all, you referred there to the rolling stock and the renewal of the rolling stock in Irish Rail, and I presume that a lot of the existing stock are diesel engines, and you will, I presume, be making investment in replacement stock to electric vehicles. I'm just wondering, if you could give us some more detail on that, on what the plans over the next 2 to 3 years or even 5 years are. I think that's a matter of public interest. Also, I think, with regard to, and I know the National Transport Authority have a role here, but reviewing the frequency and the timing of train travel to meet the needs of society, whether it's work or college users that currently use it, that we are actually matching the demands with the provision of the service. And if you could just give us some insight into how you plan around that. And I suppose the most important of all is how Irish Rail intend to attract new users of their services, because I believe that there is huge potential there for Irish Rail to exploit. As I said, people are becoming more conscious now of our environment, conscious of more sustainable travel, and I believe there are opportunities there now for Irish Rail to attract new generations into using rail travel. So you might just refer to that as well. Now, what I'm next going to speak about might seem a little parochial, but it's not. It's actually national, and that's in relation to Waterford Plunket train station, and indeed Waterford Port as well. And you will be aware of Ireland 2040 and the ambitious growth plans for Waterford City under that plan. You will also be aware of the importance of regional development, which is set down by government policy, and also the importance of regional access and connectivity. So taking all of those into account, I think it is critical that we review where Waterford City and its rail services are presently and where they need to be over the next 5, 10, 20 years. As we speak, even without Ireland 2040 and without the demands of increasing population, you will be aware that there are issues with Plunket Station, even without that rising demand. There has been flooding on the track when from time to time the station has to be closed. There is a cliff face vulnerability over the station, which you'll be aware of, where remediation works have had to be carried out. And also there is a serious disconnect of other modes of transport, where it's not beside a bus station, it's passengers that use the Waterford to Dublin service or the Waterford to Limerick service have to walk across the bridge to get other services, and I think that's unacceptable as well. So I think you're well aware of those, and even without rising demand, all of those issues have to be addressed. But I suppose the good news for Irish Rail, and I know it's a challenge as well, but it is good news because it's opportunity. With the arrival of the Strategic Development Zone of the North Quays, there is an exciting development plan now being presented by Waterford City and County Council, whereby, the relocation of Plunket Station is critical to those development plans, because a lot of work has been put into, as you mentioned earlier, an integrated transport hub being developed on the North Quays, which can, I believe, enhance the rail services, connect them with all other modes of transport, and eradicate a lot of the difficulties you have with the existing Plunket Station. And I think it's critical that Irish Rail are fully engaged on this project. It has the backing of government, it has the backing of the local authority, and I'm just interested to know, you mentioned earlier in your contribution that Irish Rail is liaising with Waterford City and County Council, but how deep is that engagement? Are you actually working now with the development plans? I know a planning application is being made very shortly, and without disputing that in any way or interfering in it in any way, it is an SDZ, it has the support of the local authority, and it is critical that Irish Rail are supportive of the relocation plans of the train station at Plunket Station. So I'd be interested to know, how deep is that engagement, or if there's any further information you can give to us on that. And I mentioned other, frequency and timing of rail services. The Waterford to Limerick rail service is a service I know is not as used as much as we'd like and as it should be. But I believe there is still potential for that if we can sell it and if we can time the frequencies to match, as I said, work times and college times. The N24 is probably one of the worst national roads in the country. And often I hear people that support rail travel complaining about the good roads and how it's taking business away. Well, it's ironic that we have one of the worst roads between Waterford and Limerick, and I'm sitting beside my colleague from Limerick. So I believe we should see increased use of that rail service. And I'm just wondering, what is Irish Rail doing to try and maybe sell that, or maybe to make it more attractive to rail users? If you would like to comment on that, please. And finally, Chairman, in relation to heavy freight transport, Waterford Port, as you will know, has a railway service directly on the port with a lift-on, lift-off service, which I think is hugely sustainable in terms of viability if we can get the business through that port, because you don't need the lorries. The ship can actually berth. The cranes can lift directly from the ship directly onto the heavy freight train, and I think that's again an asset that we're underutilising. Chairman, for the information of the committee, of all of the freight transport that comes into Ireland through the UK land bridge from mainland Europe, over 80% of that goes through Dublin Port. I believe that there is potential for both Rosslare Port and indeed Waterford Port, especially with the onset of Brexit, where we are going to have more direct links with mainland Europe, to have opportunities for these ports to expand and grow the service. The infrastructure is already there. The railway is already there, and Waterford Port are very much on side in trying to develop that business. So I'd be just interested to know if Irish Rail have any deep engagements with Waterford Port to exploit those opportunities in terms of increasing their business and increasing the business of Waterford Port as well. I think Waterford Port estimated that there is a potential to actually treble or even quadruple the current business by using the lift-on, lift-off rail service at Waterford Port, if we can get sometimes direct access from the EU and also access through the UK land bridge. So I know I've raised a lot of issues there, but mainly most of them are about improving and enhancing rail services in the southeast of the country, which I believe is identified, and we know it's identified under Ireland 2040 in the National Development Plan for substantial growth. And I want to see infrastructure being put in place ahead of that growth and to attract new users. So I'd be interested to hear the responses.
Thanks, Senator. Mr. Canney.
Thanks, Senator Coffey. In terms of the fleet, I suppose, and that change, we're predominantly, and certainly outside of Dublin Cork and Dublin Belfast, on the national network. We operate our passenger services with diesel rail cars, so they're not actually locomotive hauled. They've got integral diesel engines in each carriage. That's a relatively young fleet. That is, thankfully, before the economic crisis hit, we were in a position to replace the old orange trains that people will remember, which basically dated from the 1960s to early 1980s. With these trains, we have 234 carriages in that fleet. So that's our largest single fleet, and that is the one that we'll be adding 41 carriages to with those negotiations with the supplier at the moment. So that means, and I alluded to it earlier, a train as an asset lasts a long time. It's not like a car, it's not like other vehicles in terms of the renewal. It's a good 30-year plus asset in any circumstance. So in terms of what we will be doing, that fleet, we are currently working with Rolls-Royce MTU in terms of trialling a hybrid unit on that train, on those trains, so as that they would become diesel hybrid trains in due course, and that obviously would allow us to both reduce the cost of fuel and indeed the emissions by the order of a third. So those trials are ongoing. But ultimately, we're using some of those trains in the commuter belt because it's answering a need that we have right now, whereas they are more suited to intercity travel overall. So as new trains come into our fleet, it will actually allow us to make sure they get to their more natural service and increase the frequency and the capacity of individual services. We also need to look, I think, at the line speeds around the network. It's fair to say that while we have competitive times, that when the motorway network was developed, it certainly eroded the competitiveness. We are having certain works. We've been doing a good bit of work in the last couple of years on the main Dublin-Cork route, off which branches Waterford, branches Limerick, branches Tralee, so it's certainly the one that I suppose impacts more directly on most intercity customers. That has given us some moderate benefits in journey time by addressing the track bed. It is now something that we need to move on with and start re-railing on those lines. And as well as that being a necessary safety investment, we could also yield journey time improvements from that too. So speed and frequency are going to be huge in attracting new users, but also making the service easier to use. I am probably maybe preempting Senator O'Donnell in that I know he's a regular customer of ours. It's issues like Wi-Fi, the ease of doing business on board. We're actually in the process of renewing the Wi-Fi equipment on board our services because, look, it's productive time when you're on board. Our promotional fares, we've completely recast was our booking system, giving alternatives in terms of flexibility. Some people, we all know it when we're looking on certain airlines' websites, some people will just go for the low fare and the limited flexibility that you must travel on this service. Some people, business people in particular, need greater flexibility. So we have 3 major ticketing types now: low fare, semi-flex and fully flex, to meet those different markets. We will shortly be starting the process to introduce barcode ticketing. Again, you know, we're moving on from, and thankfully after the underinvestment, we will now be able to do these things, moving on from the ticketing collection at machines, and literally your ticket is on your mobile phone. In terms of Waterford Station, I have Tramore in-laws, Senator Coffey, so I can tell you I hope for the usual dry days when I go down, because they always tell me walk across the bridge and we'll collect you at the far side in terms of the access into Plunket Station, so I'm well familiar with the point you're making there. We are very much engaged with the North Quays development. It isn't a matter of us answering when asked. We see the huge benefit that is there right now. As you know, post the rockfall which was experienced, we have a single track, single platform operational. We've got really quite an old signalling system that's going to need to be upgraded over the next 5 to 10 years as well. We are looking at having a double track alignment with 2 new platforms into the North Quays site, obviously which would integrate bus transport as well, and that track layout would also provide for improved connectivity for rail freight to the Port of Waterford. I would say that as the Port Authority for Rosslare Europort, we're a row port. You mentioned Waterford is a low port, so we can be complementary to each other, and ourselves, Waterford and New Ross, have actually been working together. Obviously Brexit is key. I'm sure we'd all agree it feels as if there is a great amount of doubt again about what the ultimate outcome of that will be. We have provided already, we have the various agencies operational at Rosslare. They were ready for March 29th, as it were. There's going to be improved road access to Rosslare in terms of row. Waterford Port, I suppose we did have a Ballina to Waterford container business. Unfortunately, the operator there discontinued that. I don't think the volumes were resulting for them, but we do continue to operate pulpwood from the west of Ireland to Waterford. And again, those investments associated with the North Quays will ensure that there is, while we certainly have scope to grow now, and are again working with the exporters and others to identify those opportunities, the works for the North Quays site for Plunket Station will actually allow for, I suppose, greater exploitation of that again into the future. So we will be, I think, deepening our cooperation with Waterford and New Ross, because I think each of the 3 ports effectively mean that you've got a network of ports in the southeast that can meet, I think, the needs of business and the needs of those operating through our ports and businesses operating through our ports, for whom connectivity to both mainland Europe and indeed to Britain is so crucial.
Yeah, just if I can, very briefly, and thank you, Mr. Canney, for your comprehensive response. Just in relation to North Quays, because it is such a critical piece, an opportunity to develop infrastructure for not just the city, but the entire South East region as well. Planning permission, I understand, is actually due to be sorted in the next few months, and I know that there's a private developer working with the council to develop the site as well. So this is something that's actually going to happen in a number of months. It's not just a plan. It's not just something that's sitting out there. So aside to your liaison and your cooperation, is there a funding ask from Irish Rail in terms of this, or is this something that you'll be going separately to the Department of Transport with? Because obviously, as I said, if the North Quays was never happening, you would have to invest in Plunkett Station anyway, due to the issues that are there with the track and its location, due to the rockfall on the cliff, due to the fact it's only one platform station. So investment is required there anyway. So, will you be setting aside what was a proposed investment and maybe putting that along with maybe additional investment to relocate the station? Because it is a substantial ask, it is a substantial project. But I don't want it being said that Irish Rail is a problem when the others are moving on. So, it's important that all stakeholders are working together. As I said, it's an opportunity for Irish Rail. There is going to be a growth in population. We expect a growth in tourism down in the South East, and I think we can attract a lot more users to that service once we have an adequate train station and an adequate integrated transport hub, which is the plan, and that's going to happen in a number of months and not years. So I'm just interested to hear, as much as you can tell me, what plans are being made in regards to the funding of that actual project.
Well, obviously, certainly there is that significant private funding for the wider development. That has been indicated that it would cover the integrated transport hub as well, including railway facilities. But we've been setting out, as I say, both what our current operations are, what the benefits will be, and as you say, there's huge benefit to us. So ultimately, if that we will seek the funding source, if it's a case that it is not within the footprint of the North Quays development, but it is clearly, and I think it's probably been good planning heretofore. It's something we've seen in other parts of the country, that where investment or where public transport infrastructure is provided that benefits materially the actual development, then the development significantly helps to fund that situation. So that is certainly, as was the basis in which we're progressing, recognising the benefit to our services from that integration. But all aspects we're looking at. It's not just, I mentioned the track layout, I mentioned the platforms, the freight access, the signalling, the rock cuttings in terms of any necessary stabilisation which needs to take place there, and alleviating flooding. We have done some works. Thankfully, in the last couple of years, we have seen a reduction in that. But with climate issues, you do have to stay ahead of that. We know that from Ballycar. We know that that's an area where we've actually increased the track level in years past. And yet, just a short few years ago, notwithstanding the repeated increase of the track level, we actually had our worst flooding ever. So you do have to stay ahead of that.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to pose maybe a few observations and a few questions, but I want to compliment Irish Rail and putting out that expression of interest to the global manufacturers of trains. It's very ambitious, and I compliment you on that. And it's very encouraging to hear, that expression has been made, and moving from, I suppose, into a greener form of transport in the country. Just in terms of, say, the ticketing, trying to get a true ticket using, say, Lewis and maybe the bus services, is that an area that you maybe could do a bit more work on, especially including Northern Ireland as well, getting those true tickets? I'd also just say, in relation to Ennis, I want to welcome the improvement works in terms of accessibility, particularly for people with disabilities. Planning permission was recently granted by Clare County Council to Irish Rail to improve services at Ennis Station, and this is very much welcomed. I'd like to ask if you could give an overview of the works that are planned you know, and outline maybe a time frame for the delivery of that very important project. I've raised the issue of the need for a rail spur to Shannon Airport and put forward the suggestion that a light rail service would be very beneficial for Shannon Airport, for the region, and it would also provide connectivity to the rail line, to the national rail line, and it should be looked at a short light rail service between Shannon Airport and 6 Mile Bridge. In Shannon, 10,000 people work in the industrial estate in Shannon. It's a major you know, location for people, you know, a lot of employment there. And 6 Mile Bridge is an expanding population centre too. So there's opportunity there. And I'd ask Mr. Canney if you would give consideration to putting together a feasibility study on that. You know, and possibly you might come back to me on that. I suppose the day that's in it, you had some difficulties yesterday in Euston Station in terms of signalling, and possibly you might give an update in relation to that whole issue. And I just want to thank you and the CEO, Jim Mead, and indeed Colin, you know, for your continuous engagement with this committee. And I look forward to answering those questions that I posed.
In terms of the ticketing issues, Chairman, I suppose we do have through ticketing and cross-route ticketing available on our services. We also have the city centre add-on, as it's known, which covers the Lewis and indeed Dublin bus services into the city. There is also a wider Northern Ireland ticketing option, not just through the enterprise. There is through ticketing there. So what I would say is, in some ticketing machines, you don't have that full suite because, but we are expanding the number of tickets through our machines that are available at all times. In terms of this, was the full integration, obviously in the urban areas, LEAP has been established, which covers all modes. That is a National Transport Authority responsibility in terms of the investment and the further expansion of LEAP.
I'd say online as well, Mr. Canney. Do you know that you'd book online, like everyone is moving to that type of platform, you know? So
yes,
have you ideas maybe in trying to maybe improve?
Definitely. I think, as I say, we are successively increasing the actual scope of the ticketing that's available in that. Certainly our most popular cross-route tickets are available, but ultimately you do want to get to a situation where point A to point B, anywhere in the rail network, will be covered by that. Within the buses, it is something that probably would need the involvement of the National Transport Authority as well to cover an all-mode ticketing, particularly because you have a range of I suppose licensed non-commercial services, licensed commercial services, not all, if you like, operating under the same model, and then ensuring that where Lewis or where other bus operators come into play, effectively there's a lot of fare allocation, there's a lot of back office work that has to take place. So that's where the NTA really are the lead agency on that, and we've obviously worked and indeed successfully delivered in a number of parts of the country that through ticketing option. But I certainly take your point in terms of making the website ticketing more comprehensive to cover all those cross routes and indeed routes into Northern Ireland as well. In terms of Ennis, as I say, I would say basically Ennis and Carlow were the two that in our kind of our investment programme for the accessibility improvements needed on the national network. They would have been top of our list for quite some time. Again, the NTA have provided for increased funding again for accessibility works. So that planning permission is there. My understanding is, I'll get to the precise timescales of that work, will start later this year. So we will see that improvement delivered. It's crucial, as we invest generally, that it is as accessible to everybody in society as possible. We had a lot of progress in this area up to the late 07, 08. But unfortunately the progress isn't what we would have wanted to have been in the interim, but that is coming through again, and it is on a prioritised basis. It's the stations where the works weren't done before and where we've got the highest throughput. As I say, both Ennis and Carlow are progressing this year. In terms of Shannon, it's not included in the current NDP. As well, the NDP provides for a number of studies. It provides for Western Rail Corridor, which we've mentioned. It provides for Navan to be assessed. I think at 2021 the commitment is there. It also provides for the examination of high-speed rail options as well, as opposed to upgrading existing lines. The last major study, I think, is probably about 10 years ago for a Shannon link. It didn't approach the cost benefits needed. Ultimately, for there to be another study would need to be funded. I think sometimes there's probably a view that we have a discretionary pot and can choose to pursue certain projects. It does need, I think, that funding to be specifically provided, or indeed specifically it being specifically required of us to do a study like that. It was a long way away from being viable at that time, and that was at the height of the economy of the Celtic Tiger. So I'm sorry, I don't suppose anything more explicitly positive for you on that, but certainly, look, what I will do is engage with our strategic planning manager and just give you some updated information separate to the committee hearing, if I can.
Thanks very much.
On that. In terms of Houston yesterday, I think before I say anything about it, I need to apologise to the people who were affected by it. It was a very significant disruption that we experienced. We do a lot of ongoing maintenance and upgrades of our existing signalling equipment before we get into a much more we have a major national train control centre investment to come. This was effectively what happened was it occurred at 5:38 yesterday morning. You couldn't pick many worse times to lose the signalling control on all lines in and out of Houston as the morning peak starts to ramp up. There was a software issued there. There were upgrades taking place with the equipment, and there was a software fault. The company that we're working with in installing this new equipment, we had specialists with them brought in. I would say in terms of the resilience, we were able to get our local control panels staffed. I think they were all staffed by between 7:30 and 7:40 yesterday morning. And I don't want to say there's anything positive necessarily, but it did, I suppose, test that resilience for us. But the issue was resolved during yesterday afternoon. We kept the local control panel staff on standby, both for yesterday evening and this morning, just to ensure that if anything else and something similar reoccurred, that we had people there ready. But as I say, we are satisfied that the issue itself was resolved yesterday afternoon, and as I say, all I can do is apologise to the people that were affected by it.
Thanks, Mr. Canney. Senator Kieran O'Donnell, please.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to welcome Mr. Canney and Mr. Heatherly. I just have a couple of. Mr. Canney will know me well, that I've contacted him many times. I use the Limerick to Dublin rail line regularly to come to Dublin, and a couple of points really for me. I'm a great believer in rail as a mode of transport. In fact, it's my favourite form of transport. I go with the positives. The positives are, over the years I've used the rail line, it has improved. Punctuality is exemplary. Staff service is very good. And the value for money has improved considerably over the years in the range of tickets, particularly if you go online and you book in advance. For me, the things, broadband coverage has improved, but not sufficiently. Mobile coverage is dire. It's a disaster, and I've said it too many times, Mr. Canney, you're aware. I cannot understand in the modern age how we do not have proper mobile coverage on a train. You cannot hold a telephone call for more than maximum 2 or 3 minutes. It's unacceptable in the modern age. My view is, if you had proper mobile coverage and enhanced broadband, in fact, even with the current broadband you could survive, you cannot function with the mobile coverage. Rail service would become, in my view, the preferred form of transport for people that are going up and down. You have a first class, but you certainly could put in a business class, where there would be huge take-up. You get work done, but you cannot use it because the mobile coverage is so poor. I've said to you on a basic level, I think the offering of food is not broad enough. If I was on a train 20 years ago, I'm getting the same offering, a sandwich and a cup of tea. You need a little bit, small little bit of diversity, and we're trying to keep with a healthy diet. It certainly isn't helping it when you're rushing on the train, right, and you're being told keep to the healthy diet, right. So I suppose I want to ask, then I'll just go into a few other areas, just particularly where are you in terms of looking at enhancing the mobile coverage? The frequency of service is excellent. I have no issues. The number of people using the trains has gone up considerably in recent times. And I suppose the big issue for me is the mobile coverage. It's a disaster. It's, in my view, we talk about bringing in all, different types of features, different types of trains. Get the mobile coverage sorted, and you will suddenly find that the demand for investment would follow, because so many people, extra people, want to use the train. So, as I say, tell me the story on mobile coverage. And I've spoken to you many times,
and
out of frustration on the train at times.
Look, and it's welcome when we obviously have kind of when Senator does use us so frequently that he's able to speak, I think, really quite authoritatively on the experiences that you have. And firstly, I'm grateful for the improvements that you've noted. The one thing I suppose I would say is that our Wi-Fi on board, which you do say has improved,
Which it has.
is actually based on an aggregation of the mobile signals. And I don't mean to in any way, I won't ask you what your mobile provider is or whether there's any issue there. But the coverage is improving. We will be improving the equipment on board the trains to enhance the Wi-Fi, but ultimately mobile coverage on trains is based on the mobile networks. And
I suppose it may seem simplistic, right? But surely in a modern age, in terms of on the trains themselves, because in a lot of cases, I know where the mobile coverage will drop. If you're going through valleys, if you're going through where there are hills, gone. Once we get into a place where it's an open area, mobile coverage is fine. So I suppose I'd ask that you'd look. So if I'm making a phone call, right, I know where I'm going to make the phone call, right, because I'll be able to hold the call, right? Yeah. So I suppose it's a pet hobby of mine, because I really passionately believe that if you could have proper mobile coverage along the Dublin to Limerick line, which is the Cork line as well, from the junction upwards, I just feel it would revolutionise the train as a preferred mode of transport. I can get in, and I'll go on to it, but some trains I can get from Limerick, Colbert Station to Houston in 2 hours. That's phenomenal, right? You could not do that by car. So I suppose, have you looked at it? Can you link up maybe with the mobile operators and sit down and say, look, what do we have to do here to get the mobile coverage sorted? Could you give that commitment that you do that?
Look, what I will do is I'll certainly, as say, talk to our infrastructure colleagues just to see kind of the understanding of other aspects of what.
I'd ask a bit more, Mr. Canney. I'd ask that within your setup that you would engage with the mobile operators and say, look, and sit down technically as to what can be done. So, could you give me that commitment?
Good. And what I also do is commit both to yourself and to the wider committee just maybe to kind of draw together a technical note on the issues.
Thank you.
So as to understand that. In terms of the catering, I do understand there's just in the last couple of weeks there are some new products on board.
Good to hear.
Yogurt stroke granola stroke.
Well, I don't need even that fancy.
Is that right? Which
send me along the menu and I'll get my critique.
Which will, I think, give a bit more diversity of choice. What I would say is, I have to say, and we're actually at the moment in a tender process for our catering services on board. And these are clever businesses. They live and die by satisfying the demand that's there within the fact that they've got finite space and they've got the wastage issues that they would face.
There are an awful lot of positives, right?
Yeah.
I'm just pointing out.
No, absolutely. But like what I would say is they have undertaken a lot of research. They've given us feedback as well. And I do know they are trialling new menu products at the moment, and they are. I think you'll see something that is a little bit different and is then evolves the service for you.
Can I just go on say, I suppose with both my colleagues here, both Deputy Carey in Clare and Senator Paudie Coffey in Waterford. The Waterford to Limerick rail line, I know the commitment you've given to my colleague, I welcome that. The Shannon to Limerick rail line has been a long, and myself and Deputy Carey were both in the Midwest Region Authority together. We pushed on this particular matter at the time. We got a feasibility study done in the Midwest Region Authority at the time on it. That was back in kind of the mid-2000s. You probably are aware, and I'm assuming it's purely an oversight, an inadvertent oversight in your speech, but you make reference obviously to Cork and to Waterford. But in Limerick, we have a Limerick-Shannon Metropolitan Area Transportation Plan currently underway. So I would hope that as part of that, Irish Rail, when they come to make their contribution, would speak about, because for us, and it's been a long term, apart from the commuting aspect, and you already have a rail line in 6 Mile Bridge and Cratloe, having a rail line from Shannon to Limerick would allow Shannon Airport to enhance the offering in terms of both Galway and Limerick, that you'd have a spur-off a line, and maybe you might look at that, because it's something I feel, I suppose, is a huge element of infrastructure being missed. So if someone flies into Shannon, so if you fly in any of the Ryanair flights in particular worldwide, they have a rail, it might be an hour from the destination, but they have a rail link into the city. We'd like the same for Limerick. And Galway will also benefit as well. So can we take it that you might look on that particular issue in terms that Jacobs have been appointed as consultants by Limerick City and County Council, who are the lead authority on it, along with Clare County Council. So it's the first time ever where Limerick and Shannon have been linked as a metropolitan area. I'm assuming you're aware of that, Mr. Canney, yeah. So can we take us this? Yeah, we would engage with it, and I suppose the reason that Cork was specifically mentioned was that since our previous appearance in the committee, that had been published. But, we are very, very clear that there is a greater role for rail, not only that people can focus on Dublin and Dublin congestion, in all of our cities and interlinking as well, which is why the CMATs and their equivalents are going to be so important in terms of development of services. So we will be one of the agencies that will be statutorily required to be consulted, and will work with, and we will outline where the opportunities are, and that is everything from additional passing loops to allow you to give more frequency on services, and also then other opportunities for new stations, whatever. Limerick Shannon is something I'm sure that would be studied. And can I just expand from that? Yeah. You speak about, we'll say, balanced region development and whatever. I believe there's a need for a high-speed rail line from Limerick to Dublin. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to get from Limerick to Dublin in an hour. Can you tell me what will be involved in the infrastructure for something like that to happen? Because if we're talking about proper balanced region development, if you do not want people living and Dublin is so congested, I don't personally have a problem with people living in Limerick and commuting to Dublin to work. I get the train. I see many people are commuting from Thurles in particular. We're just that bit far away. And it's about linking the regions. So can you just tell me where a high-speed rail service fits within the Irish Rail strategic plan between Limerick and Dublin?
Under, as was it is, versus with the facts, is a study on high-speed rail. I think it is to look at it. Dublin to Cork and Dublin to Belfast is provided for in the NDP. So that study will take place.
So we're not in it.
Now, high-speed rail, as it is understood in Europe, right, is you're talking about your TGVs, your AVEs in Spain, your ICEs in Germany, tend to have, very significant urban centres as anchors at either end, and at a scale that we don't actually have in Ireland. So, which obviously,
well, for instance, when you speak about a high-speed rail link from Cork to Dublin, right? You're really talking about a relatively short spur from Limerick Junction to Limerick. We can meet that connection, right?
Yeah, and I suppose there's a difference between upgrading, and I suppose what our focus is on is upgrading the existing network to ensuring that it operates at optimum times. Okay. There's no reason that, say, an upgraded Dublin-Cork line couldn't be an under 2-hour journey, okay, which in itself gets you to a 1:30, 1:40.
And would that involve possibly a stop at the junction that would allow Limerick passengers?
Absolutely. But what I'm saying is that's existing infrastructure. High-speed rail, as it's understood, is building. It's the equivalent of upgrading the dual carriageway to building a brand new motorway. We're going to upgrade the dual carriageway.
Okay. And then the final thing that I wanted to ask was, when will the train fleet be emission-free?
Entirely, it's probably, given that the intercity rail car fleet was bought through the noughties, the 2000, 2010, you'd expect those to have a 30-year life cycle at minimum. So you are talking about probably 2040 completely. What I would say is that by the end of the National Development Plan, if that full order of electric trains comes in, 80% of journeys on our network will be on electric-powered trains. Now, ultimately, what's generating the electricity may or may not, and the trend in electricity providers is towards more sustainable and emissions-free generation. But the direct emissions on 80% of journeys at that time will be gone. We'll also have reduced by a third the emissions of intercity journeys because we are going to make those trains hybrid as well. Our view is once we get this real short, what I would kind of say that the very, very urgent short-term extra intercity rail cars, our wish and our strategy is that they're the last diesel trains we ever order.
Okay, and then just to finish out my question on the high-speed rail link, when you're doing the upgrade and you're talking about the upgrade of the rail line, will that involve the upgrade of the rail link between the junction and Limerick? Because obviously I'm always looking at speeds. There's one train, you can get a 5 o'clock train from Dublin on a Thursday. It has you to Limerick in under 2 hours, right? Yeah. So obviously if that was cut down to an hour and a half, right, that brings it within daily commuting time. Sure. So give me the time frame on getting to the dual carriageway on the rail lines, and will that include the Limerick to Limerick Junction rail link as well? Yeah,
we're obviously putting out the business case for that Dublin-Cork renewal because which is substantively the Limerick Dublin line, as well. Exactly. We're also, by the way, the Limerick Junction second platform is going to be very significant in terms of improving connection times.
You wouldn't think of putting a roof over it, would you?
Well, there'll be very convenient.
You want it on a winter's night, right?
There'll be very convenient lift and footbridge over whatever from the waiting areas as well. But that actually is going to improve journey times as well.
That's currently under construction.
That is currently under construction. So. Bit by bit, but I would say is you're getting so much more bang for your buck by doing Dublin-Cork because Limerick, Kerry, and to a shorter extent Waterford.
So just give me the time scale.
That full renewal is something that could take place over a 7-year time scale.
And can I ask that included in that renewal would be the upgrade of the Limerick to Limerick Junction line as well?
Yeah, well, look, as I say, we're certainly going to be putting forward that business case in terms of ensuring that the funding is there for it. I won't make promises like that I'm not 100%, but I will certainly check for you where the status of Limerick Junction.
Chairman, just on the back of that, I think, and it's not, look, we're not looking for top speed railway to every parish in the country, but what we are looking for is serious interconnectivity between the regional cities that are identified for growth. So obviously I'd be looking for, obviously Dublin Cork is vital, and then the other axis, Limerick, Waterford, would be vital also. I believe we shouldn't give up on that, and I think there is huge potential for that into the future, even using the Limerick Junction platforms, as you said. You know, so
absolutely.
Thanks very much for engagement.
Thanks, Your
And on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank both yourself and Mr. Heatherly for coming here today and for presenting in such a very forthright manner. And as ever, and give our best regards to the CEO, Jim Eade.
Sure, he'll be with you again.
Committee as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
I propose that the meeting be suspended for a few moments, allowing the witnesses to leave, and that we resume in private session. Is that agreed? Okay.